Welcome back. The S&P Global Ratings Agency recently held its annual South Africa conference in Cape Town. During a panel discussion on South Africa's economic outlook, the ruling party was described as a moderate party. The agency's sovereign analyst, Gardner Rusike, says while the ANC is addressing historical wrongs, it has ensured that necessary checks and balances are in place as it pursues land reform. He joins us now to discuss the outcomes of the conference. Thank you so much, Gardner, for making time to be with us. Now, at your conference, I believe it happened last week, Thursday, you made mention that you think that the ANC will take a more moderate view when it comes to land expropriation without compensation. Now, interestingly, last year, you said that the implementation of land expropriation without compensation, if that went ahead, it would further jeopardize the economic outlook of the country. Can you please expand on your comments, and more importantly, what supports them?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting us. I think what's important to note is that our job is really to assess the ability and willingness of the government to repay its debt on time and in full. That's our main mandate. As part of that process, we look at various factors. So politics and governance is one of those factors, along with economic assessment, the external balance sheet, the government's fiscal public finances, as well as the monetary assessment. So one element that you are mentioning is the issue of politics and governance. So we believe that politics and governance matter. Politics affects policy choices, and policy choices affect economic outcomes. So in this particular case, there's a public discourse in South Africa about land reform. If you use the language that is being used in the public domain, it's about expropriation of land without compensation. But we know that the ANC is the governing party. They've been in power since 1994. And as far as economic policies are concerned, they've been moderate, despite talking radicalism and a lot of these other things, but they've really remained moderate. And one of the other things that support that view as well is we think that the judiciary here is very strong. They act as checks and balances to the executive and to the legislature if they don't do the right things.
All right, now we are a couple of weeks before the general elections, May 8th. One does get a sense from your comments that you strongly believe that there's a high probability that the ANC will remain in power come May elections. What risks would be posed if the country took a rigorous and robust implementation of land expropriation without compensation?
Yeah, okay, good question. So there are two elements there. One is that we know that the ANC is the governing party today, and they've won majority in the previous elections. So that remains our best case, that they are likely to win the majority. In such a scenario, it doesn't change our view. We believe that the current government will continue with its reform efforts that can help economic growth, that can help investment as well. So that's the main, I think, basic assessment. If there are other political parties that win, we can assess what that means, but we do have a view of what the ANC has done before and what they are likely to do. With regards to land expropriation, I think we believe that it's more a political discourse rather than outright expropriation. We think that if that were to be the case, it would weaken enforcement of contracts, it would weaken property rights, which is not good for investment and which is not good for economic growth. So that is why we're taking the view that we will not see that extreme kind of position.
All right. Now, at the center of your concerns, I believe, obviously pushing reforms and making sure that fundamental policies are in place. Now, it's been 2 years since S&P downgraded South Africa to junk status. What are some of the things that currently are sitting in your corner in terms of, fears for South Africa? Yeah.
So we can put it into three main, I think, contexts. One is governance, weak governance. Secondly is weak economic performance, which then lead on to weak public finances. So as far as governance is concerned, we believe that there have been some steps to some extent, at least to correct some of the deterioration that we were seeing over the years, weakening of public institutions. So there's been perhaps a turnaround. Let's say we can look at Eskom for one, and some of those state-owned enterprises that have got weak governance and public finances. So they've started to change money management, executive, non-executive, but the bigger issues probably lie with changing the business models of those entities like Eskom, making them financially sustainable so that they're not a risk to the government's public finances. Then secondly, I think on the economy, we have seen that South Africa has underperformed economic growth. I think the last time South Africa actually grew at 2% or above was in 2013. So that's probably quite a number of years. So the bar is now so low on economic growth. And part of that challenge is because of weak investment by private capital. So it's important that the government does the right things as far as policy certainty is concerned, and sorting out just a lot of issues that make investment be more comfortable with South Africa. If investment can increase, then you'd see the economy growing at a higher pace. If that is the case, then you could see, I think, some positive upside to the ratings. But we're not yet there. I think investment is too low, but the government has started on some of those things to encourage investment. Then obviously the last point being on public finances. It's probably that the weak public finances are a function of the weak economic performance. Addressing growth can address the government's fiscal challenges. And it's very difficult to deal with some of the social challenges that you see with unemployment, inequality, especially the protests that you see just before the election. So dealing with this actually requires dealing with economic growth. Dealing with economic growth will help your tax revenues, and the government can have money to spend for those challenges.
Not to make you sound repetitive, but before I let you go, as we've mentioned, we're coming up to the elections. What opportunities can one expect with change in administration from an investor confidence perspective? Yeah,
I think our perspective is there's not going to be much change. In the elections, we've already seen change in February 2018, so it will be an ANC-led government by President Ramaphosa. Perhaps there could be some tweaking with regards to cabinet, but as far as the broader policy perspectives are concerned, we think they'll remain on the path that they are now. They've started to look at some of these things around encouraging investment. So it's important to continue and get growth on a higher path.